Hello, everybody, and welcome to another talk. Today, I'm going to be speaking with Kathy Norris, iridologist and naturopath. Many strings to her bow. She'll an author, a teacher. There's many things that she does. So we'll cover all that during our discussion. I think just before we get into this, I should mention that for those who have kind of make their way through these videos that I produce regularly, you'll probably noticed that there's a few iridology videos coming up now. This is just primarily because I'd recently written a book on behavioral iridology, and I was just trying to introduce this to an audience which is probably more expecting kind of Ayurveda. So just as it's a slight divergent, but I feel it's a worthwhile one, and it's such an interesting topic. And it's so good because it can be integrated with any therapy. It's just highly useful. So I've known Kathy for a while. She kindly invited me on her iridology around the world, and I spoke a little bit on there. And that's a really great show. We'll put up all the links for that later. I highly recommend you check that out. You've probably interviewed everybody there is now. I can't imagine there are that many more iridologists that you can interview. But it's a great resource because you get to see these sort of living legends of iridology speak their piece, and then as well as that, you've got not. I like those sessions you do with Chris where you kind of just do an analysis as well, which I think is really useful for people that just want to see how the experts do it. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your background, why you're doing what you're doing, how you got there, all those kind of things? So,
Thank you, Andrew, for asking me to speak. Um, you know what? Iridology around the world is, I have a lot of pride for that little show. And I call it just a little show because it is. It's just what, 15, 20 minutes long, maybe. And we are finding a lot of iridologists that do not belong to IPA. They're just iridologists out there that have learned from other teachers and other realms of natural health and other modalities, and they they are fabulous. They are fabulous, and it's just a delight to meet them and talk to them. And we've been literally, when we say iridology around the world, we've been around the world. We've been to Japan. Just a few months ago, we were at Cape Town, South Africa. We've been all over Europe. I think we've been to Croatia, and we've been to Italy, and we've been up to Canada. We've been all over the U.S. So it is fabulous to meet all these iridologists, and they share their work, they share their interest, they share their love for iridology. So thank you for bringing that up. I'm really proud of that.
It's
Chris,
a really nice format because it's concise. It's yeah. I mean, I'd be happy if it was a little bit longer. I like the way you do the analysis and then have the guests on, and you kind of even introduce or usually introduce like a little bit of behavioral at the end as well, which is really
yeah,
nice for me. So
yeah,
yeah,
that's fun for us. We
yeah.
we enjoy doing that. Yeah, thank you. So I guess I'll start out by telling you how I got started in iridology, which is, I'm going to tell kind of a long story to get to a short place, but
Carry on, no problem.
it it was I was stubborn, to say the least, to get into iridology. And my mother and my sister had gone to see an iridologist here in Texas, and they came home just raving about how wonderful this fellow was, and how he taught them some things, and he used a lot of his own intuition, if you will, to kind of guide the conversation or the evaluation. And they came home, oh, you've got to go. And I was like, no, I don't. I'm happy with my doctor. And I was like, I think that's a bunch of phooey. And so my mother was like, no, you're not getting it. You're not getting it. I knew what foot reflexology was at that time because my mother had introduced that to me when I was about 18.
Mhm.
And we're fast forwarding into my 30s. And she said, well, you know what foot reflexology is? I said, yes. And she said, well, it's kind of the same. They're just using your eyes. And I was like, oh, I don't know that I can wrap my head around that. So I'm going to fast forward. And 3 years later, I was visiting my foot reflexologist. And I finished the session, and I had a friend with me. And so it was her turn to have her feet worked And I just sat in the floor next to a bookcase, and I was looking at the lady's bookcase, and I saw a big blue book, and written down the side of the spine said iridology. So I pulled that book. I said, "Could I take a look at this book?" And she said, "Oh, by all means, take a look." And I said, "Do you believe in this?" And she was like, "Oh, wholeheartedly, wholeheartedly." And so I said, "Well, I don't know." And she said, "Well, just look at the book and see what you think." And I opened that big blue book, and that was Dr. Jensen's big blue iridology book.
Mm.
And I opened it up, and I saw these beautiful pictures of eyes in there. And I kind of read a few words here and flipped through the pages. And every time I flipped through, I saw these eyes. And it was almost like I was mesmerized by what I was seeing.
Mm.
And it was instant. It was very instant. I made this connection. And you know how Alice in Wonderland, she goes through the looking glass, and that's what happened to me. It almost felt that way. I felt myself move into the eye. And so I just said, "Do you know where I could study this or learn this?" And she said, "Well, actually, my best friend teaches a class." And I said, "Okay, I'm there. I just want to know, more about this."
Mm.
So I signed up to take a little 4-hour course to be introduced to what iridology really was. And this was the Bernard Jensen way of teaching. And so I took the class, and the first 2 hours of the class, everything just kind of went over my head. I didn't get it. I was frustrated. I thought, why is this not coming to me? Why is this so difficult to learn? And so we broke for lunch, and we went to lunch, and we came back, and the teacher started speaking, and everything she said stuck with me. And I thought, I'm getting it. I understand this. And she looked at me and she said, "I know you just got it because your eyes got really big." She said, "You heard what I said." And I fell in love. In 2 hours, I was in love. And so I said, "I've got to find this man, Dr. Bernard Jensen." And so this was in 1995, and our resources for internet were limited. We still could. I mean, we could, you had the old AIL, you've got messages or you've got email or whatever.
Yeah.
So we got on the computer, and I kind of pinged around, and sure enough, he was teaching a class in New Orleans, Louisiana. And I thought, I've got to be in that class. I've just got to be in that class. So my friend and I went and signed up for the class. We went to the class, and there were probably, I would say, 200 students in that class.
Wow.
And I sat next to a medical doctor in the class. And he was in that class under duress from his wife. She brought him to that class. And everything Dr. Jensen said about the eyes and how that you could review the eyes and look at the nerve endings and base your evaluation on it. This man sat next to me, and he disputed. He shook his head no the whole time. And I was so annoyed by that the next day I got up and I moved. I moved away from him because I thought, I don't want him to be an influence to me. I want to hear this and see this and understand this for myself without a man sitting next to me. So I moved the next day. So I sat through a week-long class with Dr. Jensen. And again, I walked out, I was just mesmerized. I had soaked up all this knowledge. And so I said, I will study iridology. And I did. I made a commitment then and there to continue to study. This was 1995, and I'm going to speed it up to 1999. So I moved from Dallas to Houston. And within a year, I bought a health food store in the Houston area, in a suburb of Houston, that was owned by a lady who did iridology. And I thought, oh, wow. The universe is just lining me up perfectly to come in and take over a business that had already been put together by another iridologist. And this iridologist, her name was Mickey Jones. And in the world of iridology with IPA, she was very well known as an instructor. And so I learned the IPA pathway of iridology and studied in that realm in the year of 2000 or 2001. and became a member of IPA then, 2002, and became certified. And, kind of the rest is history. In 2008, I acquired my doctorate of iridology, and I've just been going ever since. And so that's my story. I'm sticking to it.
I mean, it's quite interesting. I had a similar kind of thing, but it was more just it was more like curiosity. I just came across a book in a secondhand store. I think it was by a guy called Davison. It was a very slim, small book on iridology, but basically I sort of read through that and it made a lot of sense. I thought, well, if you think about things like reflexology, it's the feet, connecting to the body. It's like a reflexing the
Mhm,
body in a part. And I remember talking to a Chinese doctor, and they were saying like the ear is like an
mhm,
upside down baby, that
mhm,
it's sort of in the fetal position. So the lobe is the head, and the spine
mhm,
is the back of the ear.
mhm.
And again, it's a similar kind of thing. So it makes sense that you could do that.
Yes,
It's like that holographic idea, isn't it? That every
yes.
part represents the whole. So I didn't really have a problem with it working or not working. I was just curious to learn more about it. And like you, the Dr. Jensen route, because those were the books that were available. But
Mhm,
interesting, you found it at almost like the same time as me. I'd say about mid 90s as well. I think Chris was saying the same. So there was obviously
mhm,
some astrological convergence at that
mhm,
time, forcing
mhm,
everyone
mhm.
to look at iridology.
I
But
think you're right. I think you're right. It's like, when the light went on, it stayed on,
mm,
and it's not dimmed ever since. So, I mean, there was only one way to go, and that was up.
mm,
And I've been able to do that. Been able to acquire my teaching certification, and learn more about personality iridology, behavioral iridology, which that's your forte. It's just opened up a whole new world.
mm,
To me, it opened it up, and so I'm so happy that I can share that with my students.
mm.
So when I teach the level 1 and 2, the basic level of our understanding iridology, IPA has now opened level 3, which is more about understanding diseases of the eye itself, understanding iridology in a deeper sense with emotions, and a little bit about behaviors we learned from the Denny Johnson
Mm.
addition to that curriculum. So we now have that level 3, which Chris and I both teach that. We teach that together. So instead of getting one instructor, you're going to get two.
Even better.
A little bit more about sclerology, and that's the next big thing on our list is sclerology for
Mm.
certification through IPA. So Chris and I are introducing teaching for that. Also, instructor Wanda Seitz, she is part of IPA too. So the three of us are bringing out the Leonard Melmauer curriculum
Mm.
of sclerology for IPA certification. So we are over the moon excited about that.
I think we should, just for the benefit of people listening, because the audience may not be so genned up on the whole iridology world. So maybe you
Hmm.
should explain a little bit about IPA, get a little bit about the background, what its aims are, how it works.
Okay, that was good.
Yeah.
So IPA is the International Iridology Practitioners Association. It is a worldwide association, so we are open to iridologists from all over the world, not just the U.S. It's a worldwide deal, and we have our own curriculum based on, probably now we're going into our 40th year, maybe 35, 40 years of iridology from Bill leaders like Bill Caradonna, Harry Wolf. They are the ones that founded IPA. And through that curriculum, we have a level 1 and 2 that students can come in and take, get certified. IPA is a certifying board. We are not a school, we're just a certifying board. Because there's no real licensure for iridology, we have to be certified, or you want to be certified. So, moving forward, we have a curriculum that everyone studies, and our teachers we're all on the same page. We teach from that curriculum, and some of us have written our own textbooks. Some of us haven't. We use other people's textbooks.
Mm.
You can take that test, become certified. You could go into level 3 if you so choose. You don't have to right away.
Mm.
but different instructors teach different things, and I decided I wanted to pretty much teach it all.
Mm,
So with my level 1 and 2 students, I move into a little bit about emotional iridology and a little bit about behavioral iridology,
mm,
just enough to whet their appetite so that
mm,
they want to learn more and they want to understand the person that they're sitting across from.
mm,
And that's one of the beauties, I think, of learning personality iridology so that you can identify if that person's a stream or a flower or a jewel or a shaker. You understand the person sitting across from you.
mm,
And also with behavioral iridology, you're understanding already while you're looking at their eyes. If you study behavioral iridology, you get it.
mm.
You get it. You know that person that's sitting across from you. And I think that's a beautiful thing to know. And you can bring this out in the conversation
Mm.
just to help them understand where they're coming from.
So when you're sitting down to do a consultation, how much of it is kind of, would you have a set technique? Do you do a little bit of physical first and then introduce the
Mhm.
behavioral, or are you kind of just looking at the person and just it's more like a freestyle, whatever comes up for you intuitively, or do you have like a very sort of like a checkbox that you go through and tick off one thing at a time?
Funny that you would ask that because I very much start with the physicality because that's generally what they're there for.
Mm,
So I explain what they've come to see me about, if it's ringing in the ears or if it is a bad back or, pain in the neck or what. And I show them based on the pictures of their eyes exactly what I'm seeing. I explain to them where it could happen. Now, if they want to know more about how it's emotionally affecting them, I go into that to that level.
mm,
I usually say, now this is just me, I usually save behavioral iridology for another place and time
mm,
because I want them to work through the physicality and maybe an emotion that is attached to it.
mm,
They usually feel better and they
mm,
come back and they say, okay, I want to know more. I want to know more about my body because you've explained to me actually more than a medical doctor just did. And then I start in on the behaviors. And I said, let's talk about this behavior. And we see how that area in the neck is affecting and what is the behavior related to that area. And
mm,
then they're blown away.
mm,
So I stagger it out, if you will. That gets, I think that first session that we have with the client, that's for them to, they're evaluating me.
mm.
Besides me evaluating them, they're sizing me up. Does she
Yeah.
know what she's talking about? Is she full of malarkey? What is she going to tell me? That trust is made in that first meeting. And generally by the second or third meeting, they're saying, I'm ready to move forward. I'm ready to take my health another step forward. Can you help me with that?
Mm,
Or I'm seeing these behaviors repeat and I don't understand why. Well, let's look at that.
mm,
Let's look at that and see why. Let's talk about that. And so I will address a few behaviors at a time,
mm,
and work on those and then say, come back and let's work on some more. But at the end of that, you have a client that, number one, trusts you,
mm.
and number two, understands that healing comes from them,
Mm.
not me. I'm just that
I quite
conduit.
like
I'm the one that points in the right direction and says, well, why don't you go here or why don't you go there? I'm not the one doing the healing.
I quite like when you're doing the analysis with Chris, you're kind of looking at a pair of eyes. It's interesting to watch you sort of switch from one to the other, kind of like you'll look at the physical and then just sort of shoot off and start talking about the sort of behavioral aspects of it and then kind of back again. And it works really nice. It gives
Mhm,
a nice
mhm,
rounded feel like you've really
mhm,
explored that position and
mhm,
it's giving you a richer kind of understanding. Because I
mhm,
always used to think about that, like in old traditional medicine systems, they talk a lot about like the liver associated with anger and the lungs with grief. And it makes so much sense that those two should, all those physical aspects to the iris should have an emotional component to them. So I don't have any problem with that. At first, people that are used to physical and they get introduced to the behavioral are a bit kind of, really? I mean, how can it mean two things at once? But most things are like that, aren't they? There's many things have got many levels to them.
Mhm, mhm. And many different levels, but different ways of understanding those levels at the same time. So, if I was talking to someone about their lungs and I was talking to them about the grief, I might move into behavioral and talk about the heart area itself and maybe nurture
Mm,
nurture as well. And how that leads generally, and when I look at behavioral iridology and physical iridology, if I'm looking in that reflex area of the lung, I generally go right across the opposite and I see there is some reaction or there could be another sign
mm,
related into that thyroid area. And I might talk to that client about speaking from the heart, moving that air through the lungs, through the heart, up through the throat, get it out. A lot of people that have thyroid issues can't say what they need to say. It
mm,
gets hung. It gets hung right here. So we talk about that, and then we find out that they were told to be silent
mm,
or to not cry as a little boy or to listen. It's very important to listen but not speak your mind. Let's undo that. Let's erase some of that. Let's give you that freedom. I give you the permission to speak freely and of your own will
mm,
and open that heart lung area to say what you need to say, to cleanse, to open.
mm,
And a lot of times you'll see the tears well up. I was never told that I could speak or say what I needed to say. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. And that's where the healing begins.
mm. The image you've got behind you is rather outstanding. I mean, that's a sort of real classic kind of emotional type iris there with all those big openings in it. How
Mhm.
much are you? Because I mean, obviously that's got a great expression ring or A and W in it. It's like really, it's almost glowing where it's standing out. There's
Mhm.
like a pearl ring in there as well, or the lymphatic
Mhm.
tophi. How much of the rings are you using in the work? Do you incorporate a lot of those, or is that just like a peripheral?
At the end of my presentation, when I first do an evaluation, the last page I have is about the rings that I see and the personalities. So I might identify that client as a shaker personality. I may talk about those rings if we see the hydrogenoid or the lymphatic pearls, if you will.
Mm,
I might talk about that as someone that needs harmony. They will do anything for harmony in their life. They may cut you off just so they can have that peace and that harmony in their life. Whatever they have to do, they'll do it. I usually equate it to, when an animal gets its paw caught in a trap, it'll sometimes chew its own arm off to get
mm,
away.
mm,
And that's what you do to survive. A lot of times you might break long-term relationships, but it's for your survival. So we talk in depth about the rings and we talk about the personality. Actually, when I'm taking that first photo of my client's eyes, I have already assessed that personality by the time I put my little photo card back into my laptop to bring it up on my screens. I already know if they're a jewel or a shaker jewel or a shaker flower,
mm,
and so I know what to expect as we start to talk, and sometimes your jewels, oh man, your straight jewel types, sit there with their arms folded a lot. They'll just puff up and that you have to just drag it out of them. It's like pulling teeth.
mm,
You ask them a question and they'll do like this or they'll say, I'll speak after you. They
mm,
don't want to even admit that they agree with you or what you're saying till after you've said it.
mm.
Where your shakers or your shaker flowers are just, it's just chatty, 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 and they want you to know everything. And
Yeah.
I'm telling them, TikTok,
Yeah.
TikTok, I've got some things I need to share with you. So it takes all kinds, and it's beautiful to see all of these personalities and all these different clients come to you, and no two people are going to come to you for the same thing.
You talked about taking iris pictures. I mean, I've got an old iris camera that I mean, the equipment itself is old, but I just update the camera because it's just bolts onto a like an SLR camera. But what is your preferred method? I've seen you on there's some good videos of you on YouTube where you're actually showing people how to use the cell phone as well. So,
Mm, mm.
but what's your kind of main? What are you using to take your pictures?
You know, I use a hometown boy that you might know, Matthew DeHamer, and his Iris Lab camera. I'm telling you, that is a fabulous system. He's nailed it with iridology photos, as far as I'm concerned. I used to have more of a big, kind of elaborate
The
system
sort of
set
chin
up, but
rest and all the head and
it, yeah, Matthew's made it so easy to
mm,
get photos of the iris with the right lighting, and it's just he simplified it beautifully, and I can't thank him enough for that. But um, you know, I tell my students, if all you have is a good cell phone, an iPhone or Android that can do good macro pictures, let's just start with that. Let's learn with that. You'll graduate into that camera. You know, I
mm,
try to send them over to Matthew or to his website and take a look.
mm,
And a lot of my students have purchased those lenses for their cameras or bought the whole system, you know, from Matthew. Work with what you have.
mm,
Let's not go out and spend, you know, $3,000, $5,000 on a camera that you're not really convinced that iridology is going to be your path just yet.
mm,
Use that iPhone. Let's make it simple. We can still see what we need to see. We can see the basics of
mm,
what we need to see, not intricate things,
mm.
but let's work with what you've got.
I think also the rise of the internet and the mobile phone is it's almost like there's been a bit of a resurgence. People like really after this information, it's like it's become popular again. So, you know, it's like anything, it goes through these waves and, you know, peaks and troughs, but we seem to be on a bit of a peak at the moment where there's been a resurgence. And I wonder how much of that is down to the iPhone.
You know, I don't know that I have an answer for that. I think some of the TikTok videos that come out, I think TikTok has really been, and I don't follow TikTok, I'm not on that, but I've got nieces and nephews in their late 20s and 30s that are really excited about TikTok, and they look at recipes on TikTok, but they would say to me, did you know that there's iridology on TikTok? No, I did not know that. And I think that those short posts that people do is a beautiful introduction. I use the Instagram, and so I use the Facebook and you know, the old people's way of getting things out
Oh,
there.
I don't know. Instagram's kind of okay still, isn't it? It's not completely the battleground of old people. So.
That's what these kids tell me. That's what these kids, I tell them I'm not old. But you know, that I think that TikTok has really caused an explosion, which I'm like, get it out there. I
Mm,
don't have to be on it to get it out there.
mm,
You want to use TikTok as your format for explaining iridology, by all means,
mm,
get it out there. Um, a lot of my business is word of mouth that I have here in Houston. I do have a website. So people, if they're looking for someone in Houston, Texas that can do eyes, a lot of times they're drawn to my website. They'll pick up the phone, they'll call, can you do a virtual?
mm,
I just had a virtual just last week from somebody in the other side of Texas. And Texas is a big place, but over in a little town called Midland, and Midland is a big oil community, just
mm.
like Houston is a big oil community. And she called and wanted a virtual setup, and she just found me just, you know, by using the Google. So I can be found,
Mm.
like most of us can be found.
One question I feel remiss if I didn't ask, and that's how do you deal with this idea that there's still a lot of people I come across out there that are in early days or just practitioners that have stayed out of the loop. You know, they learned a long time ago, have never really updated it or never really got back into it to that degree. They're still using that kind of Jensenian, you know, the brown eye. If you do lots of cleansing and fasting,
Mm.
eventually it'll all end up blue again. You know, you can kind of make things disappear in the eye. I mean, what's your sort of take on adaptation in the eye? How much do you think the eye can change? Those kind of ideas.
That's good that you asked that. Well, like everything, everything changes. Everything. Our seasons change, we change. You know, I didn't look like this when I was 14. So I've changed through the years. We have to adapt and we have to grow, and we've got to have research, even though this is a natural modality. I think some people think it's one way and it stays that way. No, no, it doesn't. Through research, we find our growth and our further education. It's just like the medical community.
Mm.
They're not using tools today that they used back then. When I was a kid, there was no such thing as an MRI or a PET scan. Um, None of that. Now, it was probably in the works to be discovered, but you never heard of that when I was a child back in the 60s. Today, it's very, very common. They want you to go for an MRI or a CAT scan or a PET scan before they even really look at you. If we don't stick with the research, we're not going to get anywhere. We're not going to get anywhere. And God bless Bernard Jensen for what he did. He introduced iridology to America. And he was not the father of iridology like we think. A lot of times people say, well, he's the father of modern iridology. Well, modern is today. Back in the 50s and the 40s, when he was learning iridology around the world, it was modern then. Today, it's very, very modern. And he really did not get the accolades that he deserved from this country, from America. He got most of his notoriety from Europe, and he was recognized throughout the world, but he studied throughout the world. He just brought it back into our camp, basically. And so we've looked at Dr. Jensen, and we've seen that what he said back in the 50s and the 60s applied to that era. But as we study further and our research shows us, why would you want to take a brown eye and make it blue? Why would you want to do that? I mean, that color is your basic genetic structure, and it shows from where you came. If you want to erase it, there's definitely something I'm concerned about in your DNA that you want to erase at that point. So I'm happy to have a blue eye. My mother had a brown eye. She was very happy with her brown eye because that says something about her people, where she came from, and her health at that moment. So I think that through our research, we have proven through iridology and IPA iridology that you can alter the color of your eye through laser. You can go in and make a brown eye blue. You can take a contact lens and make a brown eye blue if that's what you choose to do. If you're going to change that through diet and cleansing, good on you. Go on and try. You're going to find that it's going to be a struggle. In IPA, I don't really think any of us have seen that true brown eye go to blue through some liver cleansing and parasite detoxing or changing of the diet. If it's been done, it's not been documented through IPA where we actually have proof of that. So I am under the belief that it really isn't done until I see the proof. If I see a picture before and you show me a picture 3 years later, I want you to have the same hair color. I want you to use the same camera. I want you to be under the same lighting that you were when you first took that picture. That's going to be proof to me. That's going to be proof to me. And then I want to see the documentation. I want to see the written diary of your changes that you made in your diet and when you did this. And so it takes research. It takes research. I mean, we could all say, well, I did this and my eye changed it. Okay, where's the proof?
I dedicated a section just to this. I mean, it's like I'll be the first one to be okay with it. Just show me some photographic evidence. But what happens
Mhm.
is I'll get contacted by people. They'll be absolutely convinced that my eye was a mixed color. Now it's more blue, and I did that with fasting, juicing, and blah. And I said that's fine, but I just need to
Mhm.
see sort of
Mhm.
comparative images. And
Mhm.
if you go on the internet, I mean, it's some of them are kind of
Mhm.
almost laughable. I mean, it's a different
Mhm.
eye. You can quite plainly see that it's two genetically similar eyes, a similar kind of construction, but you can see that the fibers are different in one. It's just not the same iris. It's close, but it's not the same. And they put them up and saying, see, this is a dark mixed, and this is a light mixed, but they're saying it's
Mhm.
the same person. Or
Mhm.
you'll get somebody who just says that, yeah, basically over time they managed to remove the yellow clogging or the yellow fogging. And I haven't found any of this. What I did find, which was really interesting, was somebody who'd had they were working with a foundry, and there'd been an explosion and some of the stuff had shot out, it stuck onto the cornea. It was only a tiny little speck, like a little bit of hot something, a little bit of hot ash or something.
Mhm.
And after a couple of days, it was so hot, it kind of fused on the surface. It was stuck in
Mhm.
there for a couple of days. Then the eye's natural washing process had
Mhm.
dislodged. What happened was underneath the cornea, the iris discolored in a yellow patch,
Mhm.
almost like a bruise, like you've sort of
Mhm.
hit, and then a
Mhm.
bruise comes internally out. So there was no contact with that ash with the iris, and yet the iris reflected the damage that had been done to the cornea. So I think there's lots of mechanisms in the eye that color. You've got the natural washing process, but injuries from the outside, even light, maybe. I don't know, all kinds of things might affect it, but it's a
Mhm.
fascinating field and one that I feel
Mhm.
we're just scratching the surface on, really.
Mhm. Yeah. I'm more concerned about the person that wants to change their eye color. Why?
Mm.
Well, I would like to drill down into that to better understand why do you feel like you need to change your eye color?
Yeah.
You know,
Mm.
so because I am so drilled into the fact that our eye color represents the base of our health.
Mm.
I don't understand. I just don't understand. So help me understand that.
Mm. I
Share
don't
that
think
with me.
I
Help
don't
me
know.
understand that. Let's try to get me on the same page if you can,
Mm.
and so I can better understand you.
Mm. How about stuff? How about like when you're approaching the brown eye? Because that's always the most challenging eye for us to deal with. I mean, to do any kind of analysis on. So, behaviorally, we're not so worried about side lighting and stuff like that because we only want to see structure. But obviously, in the physical model, undulations, changes, and things are more appropriate to that study. And you can angle the light, which actually would probably help with the brown eye. But what tips and tricks have you got that you're using when you get a very dark? I mean, I'm talking about those super pigmented ones where it's just like a brown disc.
Hmm. I have a lot of clientele that happens to be African American, and thank God that I have had so many clients come to me because that has furthered my education. I've got to get a lot of light into that eye, and sometimes you just can't. You just can't. So when I get that picture, I take put it on my laptop. I take another program and I lighten it up because
Mm,
I do want to see the lacuna. I do want to see if there's any pigment, dark pigment on that eye. I look a lot of times with my hematogenic eyes. I look into the sclera to point the direction that I need to be looking at further into the iris. So the sclera and the iris go hand in hand, and we teach that in level 1 and 2. We teach 10 signs that you need to see in level 1 and 2 that really open up that sclera for you. But as you start studying sclerology at greater depth, you want to bring in the point of origin. You want to look at the sclera as far to the sides and far superiorly or inferiorly that you can see to find that point of origin where that vessel originates. Now, where it ends is important too, but where it originates is more important
mm,
because now you're getting to your base. So if it is that thyroid area or if it's that emotional heart, and you trace that vessel to where it moves to the iris, that's showing you, pay attention to that area. So that helps me grader with a hematogenic eye, a dark, dark brown eye. If I couldn't use the sclera to give me direction, like looking at a road map, if I couldn't use that, I wouldn't be a very good iridologist at that point, because you can only lighten a photo so much till it's really out of balance. And you don't grasp what you really need to see. So I throw as much light into that client's eyes as they can stand, basically. Side lighting, of course. That good iris lens developed by Matthew really, really helps. But I take it a step further, and I've had some of those, and I teach from some of those as well, because my students are actually going to run across people like that as well. And I want them to be able to see the depth that they need to see from. So they're tricky. But once you get them, you get them.
I got a great shot in the book where I put somebody very kindly sent me a true heterochromia. One of our associate kindly sent me a pair of eyes that she'd photographed, and it was so basically it's the full binocular where you get one blue, one brown. It's not anything caused by the pupil. It's literally just a depigment, and one eye never pigmented, and you've got this really dense brown Middle Eastern eye. There's no variation in tone. It's a very kind of neurogenic fiber, just very even brown. But of course, the unpigmented eye is just awash with all these loose, really loose fiber. So it just goes to show, it's a great example to show you that even though the brown eye, we're kind of treating more as that kind of hematogenic, grounded, streamy, whatever term you like to use for those. I mean, I'd just say like an empathic, very grounded, earthy type. Underneath all that, there's still the same fiber structure. It's just being obscured by that surface pigment. So that's a good lesson to keep in mind. But like you're saying, at the end of the day, we interpret what we see, not what we know is underneath. We have to look.
Right.
So if something's able to punch through all that color, it's obviously important. That wrapping up a little bit and just kind of sort of finishing off this. So obviously you've got lots of great books out. You've got your Fusion Iridology book. Do you want to sort of talk us through? I think you've just got a new book that you're finishing at the moment, aren't you? Which has been a bit of a...
Oh, I finished. I finished.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Do you want to give us a quick sort of talk?
Sure.
Okay.
I've got 3 books. Well, two really. I've got my Iridology Fusion Work Text and Systems Companion Guide. That is the level 1 and 2 IPA Iridology curriculum. So that is for, like I said, certification. So that can be found on lulu.com. It is a, what do they call that? Print.
Oh, self-publishing, isn't it?
Self-publishing, print at will, print at purchase, kind of like Amazon. That textbook can be purchased through lulu.com, not me, not my website. They take care of all that for me. It's just a nice little feature for them to publish my book. But it is full. The Systems Companion Guide is all of the body systems at the back of the book. And with those body systems, there's an explanation of the body systems, so the physiology, if you will, about the anatomy. But there's also a list of herbs and foods and teas and essential oils and other natural health modalities that the student can look to refer or suggest for their client to use to benefit that area or system of the body. So that's one of those textbooks that's going to stay with you forever. You don't ever want to turn loose of that Systems Companion Guide at the back of the book, because I did it all for you. My next course, where there is a downloadable PDF version of the course, is Anatomy and Physiology. And that is a self-paced course, or I teach the class as well. It's about a 3-month class. That's got like 17 body systems in it. And I go into not so much emotional. This is all physical. but I do talk about some of the signs we see in the limbic area of the eye. So, because that's important, we need to know that. So I focus just a smidgen on that. And there is a test at the end of that course, and IPA requires that the student have college level anatomy and physiology. This is that. That is that college level anatomy and physiology.
When you say you're teaching, so are you doing this as in a group setting online, or is it a one-to-one, or can you do one-to-one if somebody so desired? I mean, is it?
You know what? I'm flexible in that I can do one-on-one if someone desires that.
Okay.
My anatomy and physiology is the first part is a self-paced course. You can do that at your own time. You can finish in 2 weeks or you can finish in 6 months. I don't care. Doesn't matter to me. As long as you get it and you pass the test, then you're ready to move on. If somebody wanted one-on-one, yes, I would be happy to teach one-on-one. My level 1 and 2 is also one-on-one. And I do that strictly so that you do not feel like anyone is passing you, or if you feel like you're slowing down a class because you're just not getting it. I want to work with you, and I work with you as long as it takes. So that's generally about a 3.5, 3-month course, something along those lines. The last 2 sessions that I have with a student is to work with them in preparation for their IPA test. I go over, not the questions, of course, I don't go over that, but they're similar. They're similar type questions, kind of giving you a good review so that you know this like this. I want it to come from your head.
There's like a pre-flight, so you can get like a mini test before you do the test to get a sense of where you're going to.
Yep. So my level 3 course that Christos and I teach together is a group setting. But a lot of times I make myself available to teach one-on-one just because you might have questions that you feel more comfortable sharing with me than you do a whole group of people. And that's okay. I work with you on your level. I meet you where you are.
And all the time you're doing A&P, you're constantly referring back to the physical as well.
Yes.
Making those connections with the irises. But so
Absolutely.
It's a real double whammy, really, isn't it? You're sort of getting instruction in iridology, but also you're bolstering your A&P skills as well. Fantastic. So how do people get a hold of you if they want to speak to you? And obviously your website, but like you say, social media, what's the best way to get in contact with you?
On Facebook, Facebook and Instagram, I am listed as Iridology Fusion, because I came up with that name because I have a fusion of different elements that I put together in iridology. So that kind of was a no-brainer for me. My website is universaliridologyacademy.com. So just write all that out, universaliridologyacademy.com. My third book that I just finished this last February. I brought it out in February at the IPA Symposium, was Cranial Nerves and Muscle Mapping. And that story in itself is interesting as to how I came into that. That was 12 years of research on my part. It took me 3 years to write that book because I'd stop and start and stop and start and stop and start. And then when I really decided I've got to get this out, it's time right now. I mean, the last year I was just full on, head in the book, head in the keyboard, and couldn't even come up for air some days. But that all started out with my mother again. My mother, she was a very gifted massage therapist. Probably she probably should have been a doctor, but she just didn't have that confidence to move in that direction. But one day I was talking with her and I said, "Mom, what do you think is the most important bone in the body?" And she said, "Well, there's 2." And I said, "Okay, well, what do you think they are?" And she said, C1 and C2. I mean, she didn't miss a beat. It was just like, she just sprouted it off the top of her head. C1, C2. I said, "Why?" Why do you think that? And she said, well, honey, C1 holds your head on. C2 allows you to turn your neck. And I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's right.
Mm.
And I thought, okay, she's probably onto something here. She's onto something. So the next question was, well, Mom, if you think that's the most important bone, what do you think is the most important muscle? And she said, that is so easy. Like, what? What? She said, that's your psoas muscle.
I was just going to say, is that psoas? Yeah.
And I was like, okay, what's your thought on that? And she said, well, it connects your top to your bottom. And I went, okay, well, she said, you couldn't raise your knee, you couldn't bend over. If you didn't have a psoas muscle, you'd be like a clump of mud. You'd just fall over. And I was like, oh, wow, she's right. She is right. It does connect the top to the bottom. It does allow for us to move, to bend, to breathe. Wow, she's smarter than the average bear here, you know? And so with those two questions, that built a world around research for me. Two questions. Important muscle, important bones. So once I started that path and looking at C1 and C2 and how important it was in response to the medulla and the pons and the cranial nerves, I was rabid. At that moment, I was just rabid for any information I could get my hands on cranial nerves and the pathway into the eyes. So I began breaking it all down. I'm not kidding you when I tell you, I must have had 6 or 7 books in front of me at any one time opened. And I would look at this one and do research, and I would look at this one and I would formulate this and I would track it back through this path, or look at the connection with C1 and C2, look at the brain, look at the eyes. I mean, I went mad, literally, just with all the information that I was trying to review to put it all together, to trace it to the eyes. And in 12 years, it came together. Because my focus has been on C1 and C2, when I'm looking in the sclera, and 99 times out of 100, this has pointed me in the right direction, there's a little fine vessel pointing directly into that C1 and C2 area of the spine. So I start asking my questions. Has there been any problem with your spine or your upper cervical neck? Were you hit? Have you had a whiplash? Did you take a fall and bump your head? Those answers to those questions are all over the board. Yes, no, long time ago. Yes, recently. Well, what are you experiencing? Why are you here to see me today? Is it due to a ringing in your ear? Is it due to constant headaches? What are you here to see me for? So based on that notation of where I see that little fine vessel, then I look further up, because the answer is going to be in the upper portion of the iris, above 9 o'clock and 3 o'clock. So I'm looking in there. I'm looking for reflexive signs. I may be looking for what we note as a defect sign. I'm looking for lacuna. I'm looking for a radial furrow, which is showing me a weakened nerve in that particular area. It could be the tongue, could be the eyes, it could be the ears. I'm also looking again in the sclera at the upper portion for a vessel or a branch that shows me the cranial nerves are in a weakened state. Not broke. They're not broke. They're just bent a little bit, that we're not broke. We're not broke. We're bent. So I'm looking for that sign as well. Sometimes I see it, sometimes I don't. And then I start my questioning, because I'm a detective at that point. I have to do the research, and I have to follow the trail. I have to follow the path. So I may see several things out of balance that also lead me back to, it could be this cranial nerve. The cranial nerve does not present itself, but the pathway presents itself. So I know that my client would either benefit from cranial sacral therapy, chiropractics, acupuncture, essential oil application,
Mm.
Ayurvedics.
Mm.
Some herbs, some teas may help to relax and soothe,
Mm.
but I need to see repair going on because we want to see that ringing in the ears stop. We want to see that vision or that muscle from exotropia clear up in the eye.
Mm.
There's many factors to this. There's many sides to this puzzle,
Mm.
and I have to be the one to track those down. And we've gotten somewhere with this research. I need to get more of my iridology instructor cohort friends into this so
Mm.
that they can start teaching this to their clients and students. But it's really taken off and grown
So
from there.
how would people go about getting a copy of that work? It's finished it, it's out, it's
It
available?
is out.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Now I sell that directly through my website. So that's Universal Iridology Academy.
Mm-hmm.
And you get a free chart with the purchase of a book.
Mm-hmm.
And that chart is dual-sided. It has the iridology pathway on the front. It's blank so that if you need to use a dry erase pen for every one of the nerves,
Mm.
they're tracing the nerves or tracking the nerves, you can do that and just erase it. It's laminated. And then on the back is a sclera chart. And also you can draw out, you could use it for your own mapping because every eye is going to be different.
Mm.
So it's for your benefit. But in the book, every cranial nerve has its pathway that it goes to. So that's already got the arrows down for you. It's got the point of origin, the pathway, exactly what that nerve does. It's very in depth.
Mm.
It's
Great.
it's a good piece of work.
Okay, great. Well, we'll point people towards that. And so just bringing this to a close, anything we didn't get to that you wanted to speak about, or do you think you kind of we got the bulk of it over in our talk?
I think we got the bulk of it, Andrew. I think yeah, we've talked about a lot of stuff. I hope that your viewers are interested and find the purpose of iridology.
Mm.
It's just another tool. It's
Yeah,
just another
definitely.
tool. But I like to use it as a blueprint or a roadmap for where you want to go.
Mm.
If you start with iridology and you learn to read the map and you understand the blueprints of what you're trying to build,
Mm.
the sky's the limit after that. You
Mm.
know, you can go anywhere. You can take your health any place that you want to take it
Mm.
for your own healing benefit. So I just like to see people use iridology first
Mm.
and get that good knowledge of what they've got in their DNA, what their genetics is telling them about themselves, what they are telling them about themselves just by looking in at that eye.
But anyway, look, it's been fantastic talking to you. Thank you very much for coming on and speaking to us about this. I'll put up all the information for people to connect with you. So yeah, just great. Carry on what you're doing. Keep churning those books out. And yeah, thank you again for coming on.
Oh,
Appreciate
I
it.
can't thank you enough, Andrew. Thank you for having me.